Gisella Pearl was born on December the 10th, 1907, in the cosy Hungarian town of Sziget, which was located in the vastness of Romania. In those years, Sziget was one of the few places where the Jewish community flourished. In 1910, more than a third of its residents were Jews. The head of the Pearl family, Maciej, was a successful businessman, and his wife Frida took care of the house and family. Most of the children in the house reached the heights of education, earning prestigious degrees. Gisella was a true polyglot. She was fluent in Hungarian, Romanian, German, French, and even Yiddish. Her natural talent and hard work allowed her to become the first woman and the only Jew in the country to successfully complete secondary education at the age of 16. However, when she revealed her desire to go into medicine, it came as a real surprise to her father. He feared that this path would alienate his daughter from the Jewish tradition. To dispel his doubts, Gisella took a holy oath on the Siddur, promising that wherever her destiny took her, her faith would remain unchanged. And yet her father softened. Gisella took up medicine in Berlin, where more than half of the doctors were Jewish. But in 1933, when the Nazis came to power, the persecution of Jewish doctors began. Gisella returned to Hungary and made a name for herself in medicine with her surgeon husband, Ephraim Krauss. There was music in their home. Their son played the violin masterfully to the picturesque views of the Carpathian Mountains outside the window. These moments became precious memories for Gisella. However, the happiness of the Hungarian Jews was short-lived. Gradually they were removed from the life of the country, deprived of their places. In March 1944, German troops invaded Hungary. Gisella and her relatives were sent to the ghetto, and then in wagons packed to capacity to the terrible Auschwitz. In a matter of months, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews became prisoners of Auschwitz. When they left the cars, they were separated. Armed guards spared no one. The first picture of the camp that sticks in Gisella's memory, the thick smell of smoke above the crematorium, distorted by tongues of flame. Gisella and her husband embraced one last time, promising each other, "Someday we will meet in Jerusalem." Upon arrival, the new prisoners were presented with the figure of the 33-year-old chief physician, Josef Mengele, whose decisive gestures meant life for a time and instant death for some. His gruesome experiments tried to prove the genetic predetermination of all human qualities. For this purpose, Mengele scrupulously selected prisoners whose skills were suited to his research. In the ominous walls of the camp clinic, Gisella, by fate, had to assist Dr. Mengele. What she saw left an indelible mark on her memory. There were rumors of imaginary help from the Red Cross and improved conditions, but it was all a hoax. Young prisoners were actually held in one of the blocks, drawing blood from them for the suffering German army. I'll never forget the day I first entered Unit 7. All around the perimeter were cages full of women with eyes glazed with horror. Many of them were lying on the floor, bleeding, looking like shadows of people. Their vital signs were on the verge of collapse. Their pulse was barely perceptible, and their breathing was intermittent. Big SS men moved from one victim to another, mercilessly pumping vein after vein. The army needed plasma, and the prisoners were its main source. At that moment, we stopped thinking about the purity of blood. We were not fit to live, but we were quite suitable donors, Gisella recalled in her memoirs. Her memoirs were published in New York in 1947 at the height of the Nuremberg trials, and shouted to the world about the horrors of the Holocaust. Gisella was stripped of her belongings, shaved and left as the brand number 25404 on her shoulder. She became head of the women's ward, where she treated just about everything she could, from cuts to terrible injuries. Along with bandages and pulling teeth, she always had a capsule of poison with her. Once determined to use it, she realized that life goes on for an important mission: to maintain optimism in the midst of despair, looking for light stories to give hope to those who have lost it. Mengele sought out pregnant women for his experiments, and the camp doctors had to surrender anyone who met his requirements. Isolated victims were subjected to horrific ordeals that left no chance for mother or child. Gisella Pearl, overflowing with compassion and indomitable will, secretly terminated pregnancies, thus saving about 3,000 women from imminent death and torture, dreaming of the day when each of them could become a mother outside these hellish walls. One day, on her way to the crematorium, she witnessed scenes that are forever etched in her memory. Pregnant women were beaten with sticks and set upon by dogs. The unfortunate ones who fell to the ground were thrown into the fire alive. This gruesome experience awakened an inner rebellion in Gisella, and she vowed that there would be no pregnant women left in the camp. Every time she had to make this hard choice, her heart broke with pain, but the alternative was far worse. In March 1945, she was transferred from the hell of Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany, and it was there that she found hope. She witnessed liberation. Shortly before the end of the war, on April 15, 1945, she helped a Polish baby girl come into the world despite the lack of medical instruments and anesthesia. But this time, there was one important difference: the girl survived. The sounds of the Christmas horn mingled with the cries of the liberators, British soldiers. However, the mother of the newborn, Marussia, needed urgent help, hopelessly bleeding. Gisella again had to improvise. She had none of the essentials. She turned to the British colonel, asking for what had long been an unattainable luxury for her: water and antiseptics. In just 30 minutes, everything was ready for an operation she could perform as a real doctor, not a prisoner. She described these memories of saving a life and the triumph of the human spirit in her memoirs, published in 1947. After liberation, Gisella was faced with the most difficult challenge of finding her lost family. Sorrowful news fell upon her. Her husband was brutally murdered just before the edge of rescue, and her son was sent to the crematorium. In a state of utter despair, she tried to leave this world by taking poison, but fate ordered otherwise. Gradually recovered, Gisella realized that she had to share with the world the truth about the horrors she had experienced. Soon, life brought her together with the then First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt. After hearing Gisella's story, Roosevelt decided to meet her in person. Gisella initially declined the invitation to lunch, citing kashrut, but Roosevelt was persistent and organized a fully kosher meal. The meeting became a landmark. The First Lady urged her to return to medicine, but the road back was a thorny one. Pearl found herself under a magnifying glass. Her association with the Nazis was scrutinized. Despite her outstanding medical skills, her background needed to be checked. Despite the terrible time she spent with the Angel of Death, the investigation proved her innocence. When night fell on the camp, she, exhausted but determined, took care of the sick in the barracks, rescued prisoners with fever, hiding them from the eyes of the guards. Informants confirmed that she secretly obtained ointments for women allergic to food impurities that reduced their fertility. Suspicions were dispelled, and dozens of survivors rose to her defense, claiming that Gisella had dedicated herself to saving lives, risking her life, but remaining true to herself and her conscience. Gisella Pearl found a new calling at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Each time she walked into the delivery room, she quietly said a prayer. God, grant me the gift of life to a living child. Over the ensuing years, she became the birth fairy for more than 3,000 babies. Her colleague, Dr. Carmel Coyne, who had worked with her since 1958, was always amazed by her indomitable energy, even on days when duty stretched into the morning. Auschwitz was a subject she was careful not to talk about, but the tattoo on her arm, deliberately displayed from beneath her clothes, spoke for itself. She carried with her a shadow of the horrors she had lived through, Coyne noted. In time, Gisella opened a clinic on Park Avenue, helping women struggling with infertility. Among her patients were those who, like her, had survived the horrors of the Holocaust, some of them old acquaintances. In 1978, while giving one of her lectures, Pearl learned incredible news. Her daughter Gabriella had survived, thanks to the kindness of the Protestant family who had sheltered her. Fulfilling a promise to her husband, Gisella moved to Israel and was reunited with her daughter and grandson, and there she found her sister Rosa, who had been studying in Israel since 1938. Once settled in Israel, Gisella continued her work, delivering babies at the medical center until her passing in 1988. Her mission after the camp was to give peace to more and more new lives. When she passed away, more than 100 people accompanied her on her last journey. The Jerusalem Post called her the Angel of Auschwitz after her farewell.